Hi, everyone, and welcome back. In this discussion, we have Dana Todd from Chicago, from the Shy. Dana, welcome, and can you introduce yourself and talk about some of the things that you and your organization do?
Thank you. And it's wonderful to be here. My name is Dana Todd, and I'm the founder and CEO of a company called Balladana. And we are a startup in the fashion space. And we are specifically a marketplace for made to measure women's clothing. And what's unique about that, you envision it as like a very small Etsy or a specialized Amazon that's a marketplace business model. But what we do is foster and work with a network, a highly curated network of providers of women's made to measure clothing, which is a very specific skill set. So we find them from all over the world and we bring them to an American audience at a price that aligns pretty closely to what you would pay in a good department store. Our goal is to replace fast fashion and mass manufactured clothing with on-demand manufacturing. Um, and we'll get into this a little bit more, but that's kind of the high level view of who we are and who we serve. We've been in business now, we've been live for about 2 years. We have 12 designers in 10 countries and growing. So that's where we are right now. And I'm thrilled to be part of this conversation because this is all kind of an unfolding mystery for me as a business owner.
All right, I'm glad you agreed to be on, um, and to get in the hot seat. So, first hot seat question
Ah.
is, what is your definition of sustainability? And the second question is, what are your top two SDGs?
So the definition of sustainability is definitely, I would say it's both fuzzy and evolving for me personally. And I think I did some Googling just to see like, what do other people say on this? And I think the UN has a fairly quantitative, like it's meeting today's needs without impacting future people's needs, which still seems
Yeah.
very quanty. And I kind of prefer a more qualitative definition of sustainability. So yes, we have to meet our needs now, but let's really unpack that concept of needs.
Mhm.
And when you get into needs, that can be defined in financial, health, social, emotional metrics, national gross happiness, right? So those are the kinds of metrics that are not just survive. I think a lot of people think about sustainability as like survivability, but it's really about thriving and increasing the pie for everyone without increasing the cost of the pie to everyone.
Okay. Yeah, my grandfather, and yeah, we're both from the South originally. So my grandfather, I always say that, my grandfather, he's always had these country sayings, and he would put it like, leave it better than you found it for your youngins. Right.
That's a
So
that's a
that's just
great.
that's sustainability, right?
Yeah, it is. I mean, it's a really simple concept, but I think so many people would get really hung up in with, okay, well, how, right? How? That's the sticky wicket for everybody.
Right. Okay. So yeah, what's your top two SDGs?
So for us, the concerns that we think that we can address most have to do with environmental impact and human welfare. So the top two SDGs for us are in the eight group. That's like the biggie. And then there's also I think there's a few metrics within the eight group, but also I think it was 5 and 6. We have a bunch of them that we're
Mhm.
trying to go after, but the bulk of them right now are in the 8 group. So
Okay.
specifically within that 8.3, 8.5, 8.7, and 8.8. And I'll just, for those who aren't familiar with that, goal 8 says promote sustained, inclusive, and sustainable economic growth, full and productive employment, and decent work for all. And for us, the subs to that are specific to promoting entrepreneurialism, or what they'll call more, I think they have a word for it. It's a less structured type of work that you think of. Uh, Micro and small to medium sized enterprises, including access to financial services. So we, by our whole business model, encourage entrepreneurship because we're a network model. And then we additionally provide services within that to help those companies grow and to not just financially, but also to understand how better to do be more sustainable in terms of their practices, be more efficient in terms of the modeling that they have around their economies and stuff. So that's kind of the biggest chunk of what we're doing right now is in that 8 group.
So you mentioned the network model. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Sure. So instead of, like, you think about a traditional supply chain, right? So, uh, well, and I'll define it in fashion sense, which is wholesale to retail, because that's how it looks, right? Um, so how most clothing is procured is that a designer or a brand comes up with an idea for what they want. They go to a chain of people who then define it down to the technical level, and then they send it off to a manufacturing group who will then price it, and they will typically have minimum production, or so you can't just make one. You can only make 100 or 1,000 or 10,000 in order to make the unit economics metrics work. So in our case, the way we approach it is that we would really like to be able to only make one of an item, one that fits you perfectly, is customized to your needs, and uses the least amount of fabric and waste and impact, all of that stuff, right? So we really want to get down to a unit of one that's perfectly fitting, by the way, so we don't have as many returns. Now, to get to do that in a typical wholesale, like in a big manufacturing operation, it's not possible without a significant retooling of everything and investment in the capital structure, the actual physical machines that would enable that kind of what we call mass customization, which I think is a word people have bandied around for so long that it's gotten a bad rap. But if you look at, okay, if instead of us doing this linear model of you to do, what if we split it out to a bunch of small footprint factories, atelier, which is it's like where you do custom clothing, where it's combination workshop and retail space. Small factories of like 30 to 200 people instead of 2,000 people. So smaller footprint and far more distributed so that they're all over the place to take advantage of what is closest to this fabric source, what is providing this type of style that women like. So it's closer in terms of producing what women want, because we have the data coming in that says women want this. These orders mean this is what we should produce, instead of us just making and hoping and making and hoping and making and hoping. So the network model facilitates that by being able to deliver on customer demands on a one-off basis.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting model because that does essentially reduce waste, right?
Very much so.
Now, how do you, in terms of sustainability, one thing I always tell people is, we have to get these thoughts, these practices outside of our four walls. We have to get them out to our customers. We have to get them out to our vendors. But how could you get that idea out to your competitors? Because hear me out here,
Okay.
hear me out here.
Debbie, okay.
Because I know I said that bad word, right? But I feel that although it may be seen although they may be seen as a competitor, we're all in this together. We're all in this sustainability marathon together. So how do we get that type of model, that reduced waste model, that made to measure type model to the customers, the vendors, the competitors, within the fashion industry?
So the good news is, and maybe I should pause for a second and explain, I didn't come from the fashion industry. I'm a tech entrepreneur. I came into this just 4 years ago with an annoyance that I
How'd
couldn't
that
find.
happen?
I was really frustrated. I couldn't find clothes to fit, and I was just like, well, this is terrible. And then I started looking at why my clothes don't fit. And why my clothes don't fit are very much tied to the supply chain and the fact that we have such rigidity in it and such very poor standardization. All of this leading to terrible inefficiencies and a supply chain that makes 10 times more than we need, right? But only about 10% of what actually fits us, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's there's such a wasteful model underneath it. So the good news is, in tech, And when I started looking at this, there are actually a bunch of people like me out there. We're all kind of looking at this, and we've been reading the news article, headlines around how disastrous the fashion industry is for the environment, for the humans, and
Mhm.
we're all kind of going like, can't we solve this? And the culture of technology and startups is very different from the traditional fashion culture. So I discovered very quickly when I got into the industry that the fashion old guard is very, like you said, they feel competition, capital letter C, like, no, you must hide all of your ideas all the time. And it feels very, it doesn't feel like there's enough, right? Everyone is afraid of losing the next season, right? So because they're so locked into the methodology and ideology that they have, there's not a lot of room. So the cool thing is a lot of us are just kind of like, hey, you're doing something that I'm kind of doing. Maybe we should talk about this. And we've a lot of us have collectively had conversations where we said, like, you know what, we're never going to break this system and remake it all on our own. We have to work together. So there are little budding coalitions and working groups all over the world, and certainly in the United States, of companies that are trying to make a change. So yeah, I'm not afraid of
Mm.
competition. In fact,
Right.
I'm in one of my little working groups that I'm in. I saw a my first direct competitor on a Slack channel in one of the startup accelerators I'm in. And I saw her and I saw her pitch. And I'm like, oh, she's really good. I could feel really jealous, right? But then I'm like, all right, I'm just going to reach out to her. So I Slacked her and I'm like, hey, you're a competitor and so am I. How would you like to talk? And so we did. And you know what? It turned out she was having the same kind of conversations with other people who were in direct or sort of tertiary spaces. And so
Mhm.
now we're having regular conversations and working on some things I can't tell you about, but some things that could hopefully create an all play for everyone, which would then ultimately bring in a lot of the old guard because they're the ones who have the bulk of the investment.
Right, right. So, and I think that, I mean, if you, and thank you for doing that, because I think that that's going to kind of change that mindset, and that's going to lead into these innovations within the industry, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So in discussing innovations, what types of technology do you currently use, and what do you see the future holds, for technology within the fashion industry?
Well, we have our whole e-commerce platform is proprietary, but the place that we're creating connectivity to the ecosystem. So my roadmap, if you were to look at my pitch deck, has us looking at two areas of connectivity. And the first, connecting, I forget which direction I'm in on the camera here, connecting with body measurement and sort of consumer facing technology. So that would be other e-commerce platforms out there, brands that are selling online and body scanning in order to help customers, set their fit profiles and their preferences. So there are a bunch of different companies out there who build apps and like whole rooms where you can get scanned. Really interesting things out there. So our first technology investment around our intellectual property has been in what we call an integration portal. So that allows us to pull in measurements from all these disparate scanners and normalize that data so that it can be used in a somewhat standardized way for our tailors. So step one is it's hard to use the standardization word. Nobody likes to be, they all want to be standards, like especially in fashion. It's a nightmare. So we're starting to use the idea of calibration instead of standardization, right? So creating calibrative and connective tissue on the consumer facing side. The next step beyond that would be on the back end, right? So then being able to push the information into your pattern making software, into the PLM systems, and then not just push, push, push that way, but also be able to create a feedback loop so that you can fine tune that over time, because there's so much room for error along the way. And currently, there is no true end-to-end connectivity, but there has been some novel innovation there. Gerber they're one of the big software companies that makes these PLM systems.
I heard that name often on the Clubhouse.
Yeah, so Electra and Gerber, and there's another one who's going to escape my mind, but these are sort of the old guard of like enterprise resource plan. They're ERPs, but they're PLMs for this application. But if you think about large software, most of them do not have cloud-based applications. They do not have open and connectable resources. They're not
Mhm.
Salesforce. Some of them still operate on a physical machine. They give you an actual key fob, a USB to plug into your computer to protect from anybody else using this $100,000 plus piece of software. So they've had a lot of legacy investment, but they've seen the writing on the wall. They understand now how they need to be. So they are making changes. And there are a lot of people coming in ankle biting, right? Like,
Mhm, mhm.
you don't want to pay $100,000 for that? Well, guess what? $60 a month, you can license it from Bespokeify, right? So there are people nibbling away at some of the offerings. And so I think it was all very accelerated by the pandemic. And we've seen a lot higher awareness and adoption, even at the consumer level, around touchless try on and body scanning and things as a way to get clothing without having to go into a store.
Mm. Interesting, interesting. So where else do you think that the future of the industry is going with technology?
Well, the technology, and again, so I think people think of technology as just being software, but in the case of fashion, it's very much that marriage between hardware and software, right? So
Mhm, mhm.
there are some incredibly smart sewing machines out there, right? And cutting machines and knitting machines, and getting them all to talk to other systems outside of the factory is really the next big jump, right? So
Mhm.
I think that the types of technology again have to do with that connective tissue, have to do with creating some kind of end-to-end communications. I know blockchain's hot topic for you. I had been
Yes.
talking to a number of people in the blockchain space, trying to figure out, like, okay, well, what does that first really big blockchain integration look like? What can we do with blockchain? So I think there's still a lot of theory right now. I haven't seen anything executed
You're talking
yet.
to the wrong people.
Oh, really? Tell me what's been executed, because I would love to know more about it.
So,
So
like I said, we have that one solution coming out in a couple weeks, and then we have about two more use cases that track and trace, the work of the artisans, uh, in like Africa and those countries, where we're going to have smart contracts, and before the artisans even begin their work, it's going to be set up on a smart contract. It's a consensus base, so the artisans agree to it. The third party, which may be us, which may be you, would agree to it, and then the other person, the payer, would agree to it. So then once that smart contract is on the blockchain, the artisans perform their tasks. They put their task within the blockchain. Once that artisan sells that particular, basket or whatever, that artisan gets paid immediately. Smart contract, don't have to worry about a thing, right? Because
yeah,
everyone's agreed to it. The payer has nothing to do with it because he's already agreed to it. So that payment to the artisan is automatically executed. Or you can do it once that artisan says he's done with that task, then they can get paid. It depends on how you have that blockchain set up and the agreement between all parties.
yeah, I think you're right. That's probably when I think about blockchain right now. What's the most robust implementation of it has to do with the finance of things, the contract based stuff.
Mhm.
Where I would hope ultimately blockchain would evolve would be to also look at carrying component level information, sustainability information. So it's, down to that, it's really hard. And so we have worked with a network of people, and we interview them closely. We try to understand exactly what they're doing and make sure that we have full transparency into our pipeline, into our supply chain. But it is possible, right, that let's say they need a button, or a series
Mhm.
of buttons, something that's like down to the component level. If they go out to a button factory that's nearby, because they don't produce them themselves, but that one is tied to something that might have a human rights violation, for
Yeah.
example, or might be made of something that is definitely bad for the environment, right? So any of these, we want to be able to have some kind of connective tissue and reporting if possible, because right now everything's living in everybody's systems, and it's not really pulled together in any way.
Yeah. But that's why blockchain hasn't been widely adopted in the supply chain because of that very reason. People have things to hide. People don't want to put that on a blockchain, right? And if they and if they're, oh, I don't. In my opinion, it's gonna take an Amazon or a Walmart. or an H&M to say H&M already has a blockchain, but for the H&M to say, okay, you have to track and trace everything. If it comes to us, it has to be on a blockchain or you won't get paid or we won't accept it. Then you'll start getting acceptance, because that's what happened with me with Walmart. 2007, I had a client that worked with Walmart, made up like 70% of their business. And Walmart said, if you don't implement EDI in the next 6 months, we're not doing business with you anymore. So
Yeah.
they had no choice. So
Demand leads supply.
yeah, so I feel that you're going to see the same thing when it comes to blockchain for some of these large organizations. But
I hope so. I
I
really do.
but I think that small and medium enterprises can start beginning, because whenever the H&Ms and the Walmarts and the Amazon sees these small companies doing these amazing things and getting this transparency, then they say,
Hmm.
let me look into this a little bit more. So, and that's what I speak about at all these conferences, where I say we need to audit sustainability. And I've said that in a number of these discussions, where we have these sustainability reports that are coming out, and organizations are so proud of these sustainability reports, but the majority of them aren't being audited, and I think it's
Mm,
hogwash. you
yeah,
know
or greenwash.
yeah, yeah, oh yeah. You got me on that one. But but yeah, I mean, until it's audited, until it's transparent, until these consumers say, okay, this is all well and good, prove it. Until they say prove it, I don't believe it.
Yeah, it's
you know
true.
so that's just my view.
I agree. No, I think there's a lot to that, and trying to measure that footprint, I think, is the biggest frustration that a lot of people have, especially on the environmental side. So you asked about our sustainability goals. So one of the others has to do with water and materials,
Mhm,
environment, basically
mhm, mhm,
not using tons of water, not polluting water, not polluting the world. So by its very nature, on-demand manufacturing is the most sustainable way to procure a new garment. It really is,
mhm, mhm,
and unless you like wove it yourself out of recycled plastic bottles. But basically, having something made in a one-off basis is of all of the methodologies one of the most sustainable, lowest footprint in terms of harm. But right now, only about 17% of consumers even associate that benefit to custom clothing or on-demand clothing. So there needs to be a lot of consumer education around it. Deloitte has predicted that custom made clothing and on-demand manufacturing will actually take up 30% or deliver 30% of all the garment production by 2030. So that's not very far away.
that was one of the questions I had. How much of the market does it make up?
Well, right now it's only 1%.
Yeah, okay.
And much of that is done by your little local shops, right? It's not, the big men's warehouses and things like that. It's really being done by all these small businesses. So it's real hard to track, very, very hard to track. But if you put them all together, we think it's between 1 and 10% of all garments produced right now, depending on the country, are done in a one-off fashion, done by a local company that's actually building it from scratch. So that is a good thing, right? But we trying to get from 10 to 30 on the backs of a bunch of small businesses who aren't
Right,
talking to each other is not going to
right.
happen. So back to that network model before, how do we, does it look like Uber? Does it look like how do we facilitate that without having without creating the problems of Uber, right? How do we create the beautiful distributed labor force and a highly transparent and managed risk network without having the problem that markets create, which is a suppression of the valuation, right? So in Chicago, for example, Uber and Lyft was drivers, well, I guess in any major city, they were making bank at the very beginning, right? But then everybody jumped in there and was driving, right? And all of a sudden it became a less than wonderful job in terms of the reward. So I think the economics really have to be figured out and watched closely along with those other beauty metrics, right? The beautiful metrics like we've saved this much water and we've, saved this much landfill. So you can report all these positive things, But there's got to be a way for us to also offset that by looking at capping harms that can come out of a system that's too efficient, right?
Yeah, yeah, and that's another thing where one thing I call out for these people that do these sustainability reports, if you don't see anything negative on these sustainability reports, that's a red flag, because everyone has areas of improvement. You know, even Patagonia has areas of improvement, right? Unilever has areas of improvement. So, you know,
Yeah.
if you are on that sustainability reporting, in agreement with it. Like I said, just look for areas of improvement for those organizations, and because I mean, it's continuous improvement, right? I mean, I'm trying to continuously improve myself, you know. So it's always a task for organizations and individuals to see how it can continuously improve. So, last few questions. So for those people that are in that startup phase, what types of what tips, what gems do you have for those early stage startups?
Well, I think, first of all, what I would say is don't be afraid. The fact that you're a small business, I mean, I am not a big company with a whole department that is running our sustainability goals and seeing where we go. I'm like a company of two and a bunch of contractors, right? Plus our network. We are a small company. Anybody can do this, but start small, right? You're small, start small. Pick a couple of components. Each one of those is the big SDGs are huge and overwhelming. So like we looked at 8 and we were like, yeah, we want that, but then like we can't do every single part of 8. We could do pieces of it. Um, pick one or two even, and start to not just put together a nice PowerPoint to share with everybody, but actually do the work to think it through in terms of what you're going to have to do as a business to make that happen, right? So, like in our company right now, our documentation is very limited. Our metrics are not tested yet. We haven't set our baselines, but I think you kind of have to start from like, okay, let's start by creating the metrics that we want to do, and then understand like, okay, how do we get those metrics and what does that mean in terms of our processes? So I come from digital marketing. That was my background. So in digital marketing, data is everything, right? So start with the data, start with what you want to do, start with what you want to impact, and start with the metrics that you'll need to prove that you did something. And the metrics will almost always guide you into the direction that you need to take to create processes and support around it. The other thing I would say is that you might actually have to go take a look at some of your legal contracts and make sure that they're in the fashion space for sure, that they are clear and comprehensive around legality so that you can actually bring your supplier base into that, right? So baking them into legal contracts has a way of making everybody a little bit more accountable, and even taking it into the reward systems that you do for not just employees, by the way, all the way to the top. I would say in my case I'm the boss, right? So it's easy for me, but in another organization, if you don't have buy-in from the top, you're not going to be able to succeed. So I guess I'd say, buy-in from the top, start with your data, and then think about how you can have systematic adoption and training and education, and figure out how to make it more than just a poster on the wall, right? It really has to align with people's jobs, and create reward systems that go beyond just the metrics, right, and the platitudes. How do you make this a truly enriching reward for people to participate in?
Excellent. Yeah, I'm a big fan of incentivizing efforts, especially in organizational change efforts.
Yeah.
That incentivizing has been huge, and also the leadership buy-in is one of the biggest things.
Oh, I'll add one more thing to this. So I said greenwashing earlier. I think a lot of companies, and I know we felt like this. So a lot of these huge social initiatives, right, around like equity and sustainability, these words that seem so great, but you're just like, I'm I don't want to be accused of
Oh,
not being all in on this, right? I don't want to be accused of being a greenwasher. And so what I would say to you is that being labeled a greenwasher means that you didn't do a good job of communicating your roadmap, right?
Mhm.
because we're all on this together. So if you go out and say we're sustainable, well, you've not communicated your roadmap, right? So start by putting your roadmap out there and saying we're after this North Star. Here are
Right.
the steps we're going to take to get there. Then people can see it. And again, back to the transparency component, it's like, oh, okay, I know you're not perfect yet, but I see that you're on the right path. So
Mhm.
don't be afraid of that. And the best way to not get labeled and get that backlash is to be more transparent about your vulnerability and your beginner steps, basically.
Okay. Excellent. I appreciate that. So where can people find you, Dana?
Oh, they can find us at, well, we're on Instagram, we're on Facebook, we're everywhere, but this starting point is our catalog at ballodana.com. And I'm going to spell that BALODANA, ballodana.com. And our Instagram handle is at ballodana. You can find me on Clubhouse, Dana Todd. That's where we met, actually, which is so
Yes,
cool to me.
absolutely.
So
At the
like bleeding edge at
clubhouse.
the Clubhouse.
That's Dave, Dave Matthews. No, anyway.
Too close to school. So yes, I would love to talk to anybody out there who has questions about it or wants to participate in any of the sort of ground level work that we're doing. We're definitely have a lot of grassroots efforts popping up all over the place, and I've got some research I can share with people about what we found, who's doing end-to-end on-demand manufacturing, and how is that
Mm,
prototype going from idea stage to full-scale
I
production.
would like to get that, just to let
I
you
will
know.
send you a copy of it.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you.
So, Dana, thanks a lot. It's been an honor. And until next time, signing off. Thanks a lot, everyone.